Friends, it's my pleasure to invite you all for this afternoon's lecture by Philip Green. He's the new Australian High Commissioner to India. This is his first speech, so he's going to speak to us, and it's been a relationship that has really grown very fast, very quick over the last decade, certainly. So it will be great to hear from you. So let me briefly introduce him, and then he's going to speak for about half an hour or so. Then we'll have a little interaction on the stage, and then we'll have the question and answer session. So we'll finish on the dot within an hour. So High Commissioner Philip Green has had extensive diplomatic experience on 4 continents. He served as ambassador or High Commissioner to Germany, Singapore, South Africa, and Kenya. He served as head of the division in the Foreign Office and trade there, of course, in Australia, responsible for managing Australia's relations with the United States. I presume it's the most important division in the ministry. He's also had a number of other highlights in his career. One was the oversight in the implementation of Australia's Indo-Pacific strategy following its launch in 2017. He had the lead responsibility for the development of Australia's policy on the Quad from 2017 to 2019. He also piloted the conclusion of the enhanced strategic partnership between Australia and Germany, and he's also helped negotiate Australia-Germany hydrogen accord. The conclusion of Australia's comprehensive strategic partnership with Singapore in 2016 and the upgrade of the Australia-Singapore FTA in the same year were part of his career. Ambassador Green served as Prime Minister Kevin Rudd's international advisor. He was also his chief of staff during 2010-2012. He also he was heading the Secretariat to review Australian intelligence agencies in 2004. Ambassador Green was awarded the Order of Australia Medal for his role in the response to the Bali terrorist attack in 2002. He's a graduate of the University of Sydney and law. He holds honorary degrees from James Cook University and the Murdoch University. So, Ambassador, let me welcome him to speak.
Can I greet you all this afternoon by using the word Yumalundi? Yumalundi is the word in the language of the Australian Indigenous people from around our capital, Canberra, which means hello and welcome. And in greeting you in this way, I'm demonstrating my embassy and the Australian government's respect for Indigenous people here in Australia and around the world. Raja, that was a very warm introduction you gave to me, but let me add one thing to it. To me, arriving here in New Delhi is the culmination of that 35-year diplomatic career. A career that's seen me serve as ambassador or high commissioner 5 times. I've worked across 4 continents, presented my credentials to leaders 17 times, and been at the forefront of Australia's national security policy while in my capital. Yet for me, assuming this role as Australia's 22nd High Commissioner to India is the pinnacle of this career. India is the most consequential relationship at the most critical moment I have ever worked on. So it's a privilege for me to be here today. Our bilateral relationship is at the highest point in our history. But I'm not here to rest on laurels. I'm here to get more things done. I'm here to drive the relationship further and to drive it faster. That's what my Prime Minister told me to do when he sent me here. Before I dive into what we want to get done, I want to take a moment to reflect on just how far we've come. A predecessor of mine in this role has said that success in the Australia-India relationship can be hard to measure in real time. It's too easy to get caught up in the everyday speed humps and jolts forward. Instead, the suggestion he made was that we needed to measure progress in 5 yearly blocks. 5 years ago, I was back at headquarters in Canberra, overseeing the implementation of Australia's Indo-Pacific strategy. It was obvious to me then, just as is it now, that India would be critical to that strategy. But here's what else I remember. 5 years ago, Australia-India discussion centred on what was not happening. Why was Australia not part of Exercise Malabar? Why had we not signed a free trade agreement? Why had the Quad not progressed more? Our relationship then was characterised by potential and promise rather than true partnership. Now look at where we are today. Australia has not only been part of Exercise Malabar since 2020, we hosted the exercise for the first time last August. It's just one of the many exercises our defence forces undertake together and with others every year. On the economic front, our two-way trade has grown by more than 50% in the last 5 years. And last year, we signed the landmark Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, ECTA. This deal has provided the momentum for negotiations towards an even ambitious goal, the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, or CECA. Finally, the Quad. I must admit a bias here. I last visited India in 2019 as the senior official leading Australia's Quad engagement. How we talked about the Quad back then and how we talk about it now are light years apart. Quad in 2019 meant loose, informal meetings of officials in the margins of multilateral gatherings. No fixed agenda. Sometimes no substantive statement. Those discussions, to be frank, largely centred on whether and how the Quad should become the Quad. Contrast that to what we see now. We've delivered 3 Quad leaders summits, leaders as well as ministers, in addition to a proliferation of senior officials meetings. And while today's news is that President Biden is unable to travel to India in January, Australia will continue to work closely with India and its other partners to support efforts to host a Quad Leaders Summit next year. In only a few years, we've developed a shared vision, a positive agenda, and we're getting stuff done. We're strengthening pandemic preparedness to detect and respond to emerging disease outbreaks in Southeast Asia. This comes after the Quad provided over 400 million COVID-19 vaccines to countries in the Indo-Pacific at the height of the pandemic. We're supporting more diverse clean energy supply chains, and we're working to improve the quality and availability of climate-resilient infrastructure in the region. And just as the Quad has matured, so our bilateral relationship has come a long way in just 5 years. The conversation is no longer centred around the things we haven't done, but rather the things we can and should do next. It's a conversation about unlocking greater ambition and action across a whole range of fronts. This has been the result of serious legwork by our governments and our thought leaders. Many of you here today have been part of that, and I thank you. What strikes me when considering our bilateral trajectory over the past 5 years is the sheer pace of change. In Australia's history, we have never seen such a rapid ramp up. I would say this is the fastest rise in a major power relationship that Australia has ever experienced. Our ties with fellow Quad partners, the United States and Japan, were developed over decades. But while Australia and India have known each other for a long time, it is only recently that we have truly embraced each other. Back in 2009, Australia and India committed to a joint declaration on security cooperation, a diplomatic way of saying that we should meet a bit more often. Yet only 11 years later, we signed a comprehensive strategic partnership, elevating our status and making Australia one of only 2 countries with which India has an annual leaders summit, a 2+2 foreign and defence ministers meeting, and a trade agreement. In other words, with India, it took a little over a decade to lift our relationship to the kind of partnership that we have with our closest friends. My view is that there are 3 underlying drivers propelling this change. I sum them up in 3 key words: necessity, opportunity, and affinity. And I want to use the next part of this speech to explain what I mean by these 3 drivers. First, necessity. One thing you know about me, and my friend Raja has had to endure this many times, is that I am unashamedly a strategic realist. For me, this makes the interests that Australia and India share paramount to our relationship. Everyone here knows that we are living in challenging times, in a more dangerous and volatile region. Global military expenditure is growing, and measures to constrain conflict are not. China's military build-up is now the largest of any country since the end of the Second World War. This build-up is occurring without transparency or reassurance to the region about its intent. And it's not just in the military domain where we see this. We are seeing strategic competition play out amongst a range of states across multiple domains, from the economic to the diplomatic to the geotechnical, interwoven by a contest of narratives. We are witnessing the use of coercive trade measures, political interference, and disinformation. Such actions by some countries encroach on the ability of others to fully exercise their sovereignty and to decide their own destinies. Such behaviours are compounding risks globally and pose historic and significant dangers to our ways of life. I'm only 4 months into my time here, but my impression is that India knows these things better than many others. Australia has felt, in different ways, the impact of these dynamics. And if India and Australia want to preserve an open, stable, and prosperous Indo-Pacific, we need each other. We need the region the same way. We see the region the same way. We share the same goals, and we both know what needs to be done. That is what strategic alignment looks like. A mission to work together. We have a profound responsibility to do all that we can to prevent, but also to prepare for, the worst case scenarios. In our case, the responsibility is to preserve peace by changing the calculus of those who would seek to undermine it. This means bolstering our deterrence and denial capabilities. In Australia, we have begun a generational reinvestment in the size, capability, and structure of our Defence Force. We are acquiring nuclear-powered submarines, long-range strike systems, manufacturing guided munitions, and upgrading air bases across northern Australia. But Australia's defences are not enough alone. We need partners to achieve strategic balance, partners with whom we share a common cause. Australia is investing in our network of strategic partnerships. We know that when countries pool their resources and combine their strengths, this is a decisive competitive advantage. And India is an indispensable partner, critical for achieving the sort of strategic equilibrium that we need. Our defence ties are finding new landing points all the time. This year, for the first time, we welcomed an Indian submarine to dock in Australia, and we welcomed visits by 2 Indian military aircraft to the Cocos-Keeling Islands in the Indian Ocean. Our sense of partnership was on full display last month at our second Foreign and Defence 2+2 meeting in Delhi. Our ministers agreed to an ambitious set of outcomes, including expanding the scope and complexity of our joint military exercises and to continue deployment of aircraft from each other's territories to enhance shared maritime domain awareness. We also decided that our diplomats should be working more cohesively in the Indo-Pacific region. It is necessity that drives Australia and India and work together in combination with other nations to enhance our collective security and prosperity. The second element accelerating our relationship is opportunity. By this I mean the great prospects that our underlying commercial, entrepreneurial and demographic strengths offer each other's economies. Our economic complementarity. What does complementarity look like in practice? Let's look at it first from the perspective of India's aspirations for 2030. By 2030, India wants to install 500 gigawatts of renewable energy generation, double its current capacity, and produce 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen. It wants to be a global giant in electric vehicles and battery manufacturing. It wants to be exporting $2 trillion worth of goods and services. And it wants university places for 70 million young Indians. Australia can partner with India to achieve all these ambitions by 2030. Because we too have ambitions. Australia already supplies half the world's lithium. We're the second largest producer of cobalt and the 4th largest producer of rare earths on the planet. Australia has the critical minerals needed to fuel the transition to net zero. But we need partners. Partners to invest in our mines and refineries. Partners to transform those minerals into solar cells, batteries for electric vehicles, and into green steel, and then to export them to the world. We need more than an assembly line offshore. We need partners who can collaborate on innovation and technology. We need partners with young, skilled workforces who can take two-way investment and transform it into the manufacturing supply chains of the future. India fits that picture better than any country I know. Our ECTA agreement eliminated tariffs on most of the critical minerals needed for solar panels, electric cars, wind turbines, mobile phones, and more. And the CETA agreement, which we're now negotiating, will boost supply chains for the minerals needed by India to drive its manufacturing and exports. India's finance minister, Sitaraman, said just last week that India was the second most sought after manufacturing destination in the world. With Australia's critical minerals, there's no reason it can't be the first. But our partnership will not just deliver for one sector. In education, the number of Indian students enrolled in Australian courses is 10 times higher than it was in 2002. There's a reason for this. India has a lot of young people to be upskilled, and Australia has a complementary dynamic. We have unmet potential for our universities to train able young people. So there's a strong basis for Indian students to continue to choose Australia. But there's no reason for it to be a one-way street. Next year, Australia's Deakin and Wollongong universities will be the first foreign universities to set up campuses in India. opening a new chapter in our education ties. They won't be the last either. India's readiness to host foreign branch campuses is driving interest among many other Australian universities. When it comes to our economies, our resources and our skills, we are a match, a natural fit. The third driver that is bringing us together is our increasing affinity. Since my arrival here, I've been taken by the concept of the human bridge. Between 2011 and 2021, the number of Australians with Indian ancestry more than doubled. India has surpassed China and New Zealand to become the third largest country of birth for Australians. Only Australians born in Australia and the UK outnumber them. Today, Indians are woven into the contemporary Australian story. That diaspora is educated, entrepreneurial, and engaged. Does that sound like a vapid sentiment? Well, it's actually the empirical reality evident from the Australian census. Our census data from 2021 tells us that Indian Australians, once settled, are 1.5 times more likely to volunteer in the community than any other major diaspora group. The census also tells us that Indian Australians are around twice as likely to be educated at master's degree or higher than Australia's overall population. And Indian Australians are twice as likely to be entrepreneurial and start their own business. We in the Australian government want to leverage the opportunity offered to us by an able, active, engaged Indian diaspora. That's why our Prime Minister announced the establishment of a Centre for Australia-India Relations, backed by millions of Australian dollars and headed by 2 distinguished Australians of Indian origin. The centre will be a catalyst for Australian and Indian business, as well as a champion for the diaspora community in Australia. No other partner country for India has set up such an institution, invested so much in our ties, and headed it by such significant and impressive members of the diaspora. Necessity, opportunity, and affinity, strategic alignment, economic complementarity, and human connection. These are the 3 drivers that are impelling our partnership. These 3 drivers tell us why Australia and India have embraced each other. But the instrumental question for me then becomes, how can we harness this momentum and channel it to have the greatest impact in the future? At this stage in our relationship, what matters is where we focus and how we work together. No 2 relationships are alike. But across my career, I'd like to think I've learnt a thing or 2 about building international partnerships. I want to give special credit here to my good friend, the US Ambassador, Eric Garcetti. Eric got me thinking on this when he said that India and the US had changed their Facebook status from "it's complicated" to "we're dating." Well said, Eric, but let me extend the metaphor. We too have a status update with India. But it's more than that, isn't it? We're not just telling the world we're together. We're settling in with each other. We're buying furniture. We're meeting the families. We're making long-term plans. We're sharing responsibilities and developing new habits. We're also learning about each other at a deeper level. We've had our differences, and we're managing sensitive issues, including the concerns we have about alleged activities on US and Canadian territory. We're also taking a greater interest in how each of us develop. For Australians, this means taking a bigger interest in the trajectory of your society, your governance, your institutions and traditions. We're taking a bigger interest because as we build this partnership, your trajectory is more important to us than it was before. Much more important. The romance hasn't gone. We're just building something more meaningful. We're nurturing our chemistry and developing something more tangible because relationships need substance. They need honesty. They need a readiness to sensitively manage differences and not just tick the box that says friend. A partnership works best when it's self-fulfilling, when we create a positive feedback loop, a snowball effect, if you like, of cooperation. And it's when your bilateral relationship has a multiplier effect on others. Thinking about our relationship leads me to identify 3 areas where working together, India and Australia can most meaningfully step up our engagement. The 3 focus areas for me are maritime domain awareness, two-way trade and investment, and the green energy transformation. In each of these 3 areas, there is a clear trajectory of cooperation already. But further concentrated effort by our governments can deliver substantial benefits not only for Australia and India, but for our partners in the wider region. Let me outline the goals I have in mind for each of these areas. First, maritime domain awareness. This was a key area of discussion during our recent visits by the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. It's where we have the most scope to turn our strategic alignment into practical, cohesive diplomatic actions. It is where we each need the other the most, where the necessity of cooperation is greatest. Our maritime cooperation also sends a message to our region. It reminds them that we are protecting vital sea lanes, monitoring vulnerable choke points, and responding to the needs of the maritime environment. Our maritime neighbourhood is large, it is complex, and it is diverse. Australia can't cover it all. India can't cover it all. Our other partners, including the Americans, can't cover it all. But together, we can get a much better picture, a truly shared picture. I want to see us deepen our maritime cooperation, share responsibility, and maximise our resources to monitor and protect the Indian Ocean. That means routinely using each other's offshore territories to expand our strategic reach. It means working towards a stage of deep interoperability, where our forces are side by side and seamlessly exchanging ideas, tactics, and procedures. And eventually, I would hope that we can exchange and integrate personnel and equipment too. Interchangeability is an aspiration we should persist with. To bed down habits of cooperation among our defence personnel. I want to see Indian officers at Australian Joint Headquarters embedded alongside the Australian Defence Force. There may even be a place for developing together the capability to more efficiently build this shared picture. For example, by using autonomous vessels that have extreme range and endurance. A Sydney firm, Osseous, has already fielded such a capability with the Australian Navy and is exploring opportunities with India too. Second, I want to see us boosting two-way trade and investment. I want us to have a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement that expands the range of goods available in India, strengthens Indian supply chains, and advances its green transition. ECTA already gets us some of the way there. 96% of Indian goods now enter Australia duty-free, and 85% of Australian goods now enter India without tariffs. Our companies have noticed and they're benefiting. India's utilisation rates for goods under our agreement is 77%, around triple what it is for some of India's other free trade agreements. we have seen Australian imports of India's agricultural goods increase by 16%, and imports of Indian apparel increase by 9%. Our CECA agreement will take this even further and faster to deliver for Australian and Indian businesses. We've had some good rounds of negotiation. We have a lot of text settled. We know India is focused at present on getting to the finish line with the UK. We are ready to conclude our second phase in due course, but our focus will be on ambition. A good deal, not any deal. In 5 years, I want to see our trajectory continue on migration, tourism and education, and the intermingling of our peoples. I want to see that human bridge increase our investment links as people who know both India and Australia continue to create opportunities that enrich us both. Beyond these areas, there's scope for more cooperation on agriculture. Australia and India have been collaborating for decades on better farming practices. This is important, particularly since 700 million Indian livelihoods depend on agriculture. Australia is proud to be delivering support for them. Australian firms are deploying technology to tackle animal diseases and to lower the emission of fertilisers. Our agencies are sharing research on sustainable water management and more drought-resilient rice, chickpeas and wheat. And now with ECTA, our industries are partnering together across sectors like horticulture, wine, dairy, cotton and wool. Deeper economic engagement, including through concluding a comprehensive free trade agreement, will bring further benefits for those 700 million souls. Third and finally, the green energy transformation. There can be no affordable, scalable, renewable solutions globally without India. And there can be no Indian renewable solution without inputs from Australia. Our ECTA sets up our industries well with the elimination of tariffs on most critical minerals inputs. But we need to be more focused. The market for these critical minerals in Australia is hot, with North America, Europe and East Asia securing much of the offtake. I want Indian batteries made with Australian lithium. I want Indian green steel being made with Australian green iron. I want Indian solar panels being made with Australian silicon. No one understands the complexity of mining and critical minerals supply chains like Australia. But to make this happen, we need to work together so Indian companies can quickly secure the offtake needed to meet India's domestic production goals. India has serious targets to decarbonise its steel sector and produce green steel. Australia and India are collaborating on research to make steel more efficient and less carbon intensive. This could all be so much easier if low carbon hot briquetted iron produced with Australian green hydrogen could be part of India's green steel supply chain. As India works towards its goal of a net zero steel supply chain by 2070, hot briquetted iron is surely part of the solution. And I want India to become a global manufacturing hub for the solar PV that the world needs to get to net zero, using Australian silicon and critical minerals backed by tangible, innovative collaboration on technological advancements. Australia is a clear part of that story. So it should be. The PERC technology that is used in 90% of the world's solar panels was invented in my hometown, Sydney. We're working with India to share technology and the lessons we've learnt to accelerate India's solar industry development. In conclusion, if we can focus and achieve these priorities by mobilising and enabling our governments, there is no stopping the transformative impact of the Australia-India relationship for ourselves, for our allies and partners, and for our region. Our relationship will continue to broaden and deepen so that we are fully integrated strategic, economic and cultural partners collaborating across all domains. In 5 years' time, at the next stocktake, I'm confident that we'll have a partnership that is succeeding in realising its potential. In 5 years' time, I'd like my successor to look at where we are now with the same sense of achievement and ambition as I've shared with you today. Over the next 5 years, I'm confident we can take the relationship to that point. I look forward to doing it together. Thank you very much.
Okay, before we go to the audience question and answers, maybe Philip, I'll ask you a couple of questions. First, let me say that I've heard many definitions of a diplomat. One of the more interesting ones is a diplomat is a person who takes a long time to say nothing. But I think what we've seen just now is the opposite of that. What we've had is really a very clear presentation, a structured presentation that also lays out very clear drivers. You mentioned alignment, opportunity, and the affinity, the strategic alignment, the economic complementarity, and the living bridge. You also identified 3 clear goals: maritime domain awareness on the security side, on the trade, expanding the trade treaty into the free trade one, and then the question of green transition. So this is really a very ambitious agenda. We hope that a large part of it will be done when you're here. But my question is this: on the strategic side, you talked about the kind of expanding strategic engagement between India and the US bilaterally beyond the Quad. Our natural geography where our synergies come together is really Southeast Asia, the Eastern Indian Ocean, or Southeast Asia, where our neighborhoods meet and our interests are common. So, given the difficulties that ASEAN seems to have with the Quad, with the kind of rapid change in the region's security outlook that has happened, are there ways in which how do India and Australia work together? I just want to say, I don't think India has understood how deep a relationship Australia has with Southeast Asia. Actually, the Australian trade with ASEAN is bigger than India's trade with ASEAN. So their look-north policy is probably richer than India's look-east policy. They also have very deep security contacts. Through the FPDA, the FICO arrangement with Malaysia and Singapore, to Philippines, where you help them do the counter-terror campaign over years, as well as with Indonesia, where you had the strategic partnerships on again, off again. So given this, your deep relationship there and our ambitions in Southeast Asia, and the problem that we have with the ambivalence, questions about the Quad, what is it that we can do together to convince the region to work with us in the years ahead?
Good question, Raja. Southeast Asia is pivotal to our ambition to achieve a strategic equilibrium in the region. It's in many ways the heart of the Indo-Pacific. And what strategic directions ASEAN chooses to take is in some ways the litmus test for our success to uphold the sort of region that we want to have. So yes, we've been active in Southeast Asia for many years. And along with the Southwest Pacific, it's the level of our deepest strategic engagement. And we're increasing that level of strategic engagement as we speak. We think that all of us in the Quad need to be maximising what we can do to ensure that Southeast Asian economies are prosperous, that the countries are sovereign, and that they can make the choices that they best want. We think that having the Quad provides a level of strategic reassurance to those in Southeast Asia that there are a group of significant countries, significant democracies, that stand for the rule of law, for freedom of navigation, for the absence of coercion, and the sovereignty of states. Now, I won't presume to say what India should do about that. Your country has a long and distinguished tradition of diplomacy in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. But I did say in my speech quite deliberately that we think there is a role for Australia and India together to be working more cohesively and more coherently in our region. You know, we're kind of used to this because of the sort of partners we have in the United States and to some extent the British, and certainly the New Zealanders. We have a long tradition of working together with our partners to try to have a greater effect than the sum of the parts. We think that as part of the next phase of the Australia-India relationship, we can do more of that with you. And let me say one other thing. So, one of the beauties of the Quad is we each bring different endowments from our countries to each of these subdomains. And your country, with a unique tradition of leading the decolonisation and then managing a democratic period of 75 years of your country and upholding your sovereignty, that is an endowment which is different from those of the rest of the Quad partners and can amplify our network effect.
The second question I wanted to ask, you talked about the living bridge. The diaspora in Australia is now close to 1,800,000, I think quite large in terms of the size of Australia. And this is a phenomenon that we are seeing, the dramatic expansion of Indian diaspora in the English-speaking countries, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, of course. But this living bridge is also bringing its own problems as well. That the interpenetration of the politics, what happens in one country, how it affects the other, and the sense in Delhi that, look, some of Delhi's concerns are not being looked at, and the concern in some of the English-speaking countries that, look, India does things which are not acceptable to them. So given, where is Australia on this, given the debate on Canada that we've had and with the US currently, how do you see the India-Australia management of the living bridge?
Well, thanks for asking that question. And the first thing to say is that you will have noticed that I took some pains to underline the benefits that we perceive as coming to us from the Indian diaspora in particular. And I must say, when I first read them, I was very struck by those statistics about how much more engaged, how much more entrepreneurial Indian migrants to Australia are than other groups. Unmistakably, our country sees great advantage in the large number of Indians who have chosen to make Australia home. And that is the paramount dynamic. We are used to migrant groups from different parts of the world bringing with them some level of frictions between their communities. This is not a new phenomenon for us. And we are used to finding ways of ensuring that those frictions don't bubble over into violence and lawlessness. So, we regard it as fundamental that Indians and others who choose to make Australia their home can protest in a peaceful way. That is a core part of our democracy. But that needs to be done in a way that doesn't bubble over into any law-breaking or violence. And I have seen the way in which our multicultural authorities, our foreign affairs authorities, our intelligence authorities, our security authorities work together to make sure that risks of violence between communities are kept to a minimum, and importantly, in this case, that Indian diplomatic premises, consuls generals and high commissioners have their dignity fully respected.
Thank you. So we'll go to the floor now. I'm going to see, so can you introduce yourself and make it brief, just so that we can take a few more questions?
Thank you for the wonderful talk. It was really wonderful listening.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Dr. Shripana Pathak. I'm Associate Professor of Channel Studies at OPG Global University. You mentioned as to how the India-Australia relationship has moved forward so dynamically and so drastically. My question is just an attempt to find out if the same principles of friendship which Australia applies to the US applies also to us. 5 days ago, Spain expressed...
I think the question is made, but we'll take some time.
Well, if I may, Roger, can you just repeat the core of the question, please?
Yes, if the same principles of friendship which apply to the US also applies to us, to India. The same does.
Oh, I see. Friendship, yes, but it's of a different character, isn't it? I think I've gone to a lot of pains to say that the development of the Australia-US relationship has gone forward over decades, and the United States is the foundation stone of our security, and our ANZUS alliance is the most important part of our global security network. So, that has been fertilised by decades of very close cooperation, tourism, education, whatever, between Australia and the United States. So in India, we're catching up. We're catching up fast. Some things have already overtaken. There's now more people of Indian origin than there are people of American origin in our country. But there's a stability about the US-Australia relations at a people-to-people level. And in a good way, Australia-India relations are not so stable. They're moving fast, and there are many opportunities to take advantage of.
So please introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, High Commissioner. I'm Rahul Banerjee, I'm the Managing Director at Vice House. We are Paul's think tank. I was planning to ask something else, but I will take the question.
Just keep it short.
Right. You just now mentioned that India and Australia relationships are not that stable, but are moving fast. What are the factors that will be needed to make it stable? Thank you.
Well, perhaps stable is right. They're not in a solid state, right? They're dynamic. That's the point. And in a way, I don't want stability. I don't want a solid state. I want a rapidly progressing, dynamic bilateral relationship.
Smita, yeah.
Hi, Commissioner Smita Sharma. I am an independent journalist. You mentioned that you are managing sensitivities, including the alleged activities on US-Canadian soil. How does Australia, as a Five Eyes partner, weigh in on the current evidence to say provided by Canada and in the US? And also, has Australia shared any information or input on this matter with India?
Well, the first thing to say is that Australia's engagement with India on these issues is less as a Five Eyes partner, more as a friend of India, and a country that is respectful of India, with which we have a mature relationship. We discuss these issues sensitively and carefully behind closed doors. And I don't propose to go any further today than the statements that my foreign minister and our department has made about our anxieties over these matters. I will say that we are on a strong trajectory with India, and our bilateral partnership continues to grow and flourish.
Pradeep, I see Pradeep here. Pradeep has followed India-Australia trade for many years. Pradeep, would you just have a question on the trade, and are we being ambitious enough?
No, Yeah, I think either you already answered, you raised the question that I wanted to ask the High Commissioner. But High Commissioner, just to go back on what was just discussed, what we are certainly concerned is with the kind of attack on Hindu temples in Australia by so-called Khalistani elements, which is what comes out from the US-Canada rubric as well. And what is it that Australia is doing in order to prevent that? I'm not going back to the good old days when there was the problem of the students being attacked, Indian students being attacked, but that chapter is closed. So that kind of problem which arises is something which certainly concerns many of us. And in any case, just to leave aside, half my family are Australians. My daughter works for the Department of Defense.
Yeah, I think so. You have a question, trade as well?
No, I did. No, when do you expect the comprehensive economic partnership agreement to be resolved, to be signed? Is there a deadline? Is there a timetable?
Well, there's definitely not a deadline. Our focus is on making sure we get a high quality agreement. And yes, we're keen to move ahead. We've had 7 good rounds of negotiations. Discussions are going on. But our focus is making sure that the deal that we reach genuinely works for the opportunities of our bilateral relationship that I have set out. And I'm very confident that we will get there.
Raji, you want any question on security?
No, I think.
Can I answer my question about the Khalistani elements?
Well, I thought much of it had been answered in my answer to the previous question. We take the sort of acts that you were talking about in relation to Hindu temples as seriously as we would take any act in relation to any religious element in our society. And we have a lot of experience of dealing with this. And our police and intelligence and multicultural agencies and state authorities are deeply focused on this. And you've perhaps seen that in our country, this has not spilt over into anything truly troubling or serious. And that's not entirely coincidental. That's in large measure because we take it seriously, and as Australian government, we deal with problems that we find.
Yeah, right, Raji.
Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Raji Rajgopalan, and I'm from the Center for Security Strategy and Technology at the Services Foundation. Just a quick question on the critical supply chains sort of a partnership, both in the bilateral context but also the trilateral initiative, Japan, Australia, India. And we keep hearing that there is progress, but I think also there is a sense that developing a shared understanding of what those critical supply chains do mean and where are we. Can you give us a status of an update on where we are in terms, especially this trilateral partnership? I'm trying to get a sense of it. I haven't seen much in the open domain. Thank you.
Well, there's a lot of action, both on the government-to-government level and particularly since I've been here on a government-to-business level. So I see a lot of Indian firms, some which have a government relationship and some which are purely private, who are looking for part of the critical mineral supply chain in Australia. And my advice to them is you will need to move quickly. The demand for lithium in particular in Australia is high. And others, including those from North America and North Asia and Europe, are already deeply engaged. The other reality is that although some amounts of these minerals and metals can be secured relatively quickly on the spot market, to make sure that Indian firms have long-term supply in bulk of these commodities will take time. It will take the development of new mines in Australia, and that's not a quick process. And the third thing to say is, it's not just a question of getting the minerals and metals out of the ground. It's also a matter of the beneficiation of those so that the refining can take place in countries like Australia, Japan, and India. So for instance, we are very keen on the export of more refined levels of lithium in Australia that can be used directly by India in its supply chain. So there's a lot of action, but it requires determined activity by Indian firms and governments now.
Okay, it's going to be the last question. Gaurav, can you just stand up? No, the next. Gaurav, yeah.
Thank you, High Commissioner. I'm Gaurav from a think tank in Delhi, CSTR. I'm going to just quickly take on one of the analogies. So most of the people in this room perhaps have dated and have bought furniture together, but some of us probably also have to sell it and divide it. So, and I see like the trajectory you painted 2023 has been great. We see actualization of the potential in the relationship. But what would be the worries, for 2024? Are there any red lines, or are you saying that the necessity and the opportunities in the relationship have made it completely secure?
That's a really good question. Raja's probably better at me than determining what the black swans are. And the reality is that the bilateral partnership between Australia and India in the past has often been pulled back by some development or other that we didn't anticipate. One of the reasons I went to some trouble to outline what the fundamental drivers of the relationship are is to say that what we are building at the moment is not just based on sentiment, or not just based on some flimsy idea of how we might cooperate together, or not just based on the perspectives of a particular politician or politicians, even though the perspectives of our politicians are positive. What I see is a future relationship that is grounded in fundamental drivers that will not change. So, we can debate how much more we'll be able to build in this bilateral partnership, but I think it extremely unlikely that we could be tripped up in the future given the strong things that drive us forward.
Thank you. I think all good things must come to an end. This is really the first speech by the High Commissioner. I'm sure it's going to be in Delhi for a long time, and I'm sure there'll be other opportunities to engage with him on where the relationship is headed. I, for one, I think we didn't go into it, the question of underwater technologies. In fact, it's often we tend to underestimate these technological and scientific depth of Australia. So my sense is there's a lot more unfinished business there to the emerging technologies in Australia, as well as India, beyond the green stuff, actually moving towards something like an ISET. Of course, it's part of the Quad as well, but more directly bilateral technological development that can bring both economic security as well as military security to India. We hope that we'll see much progress in the days ahead. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to thank the High Commissioner for giving Asia Society the opportunity to work with you on this program, and for laying out once again in such a clear, structured presentation of where we are coming from and where we are going and what are the priorities for the bilateral relationship in the coming years. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking you. I want to say that please join us next room for a cup of tea. The doors are being opened, so please look forward to seeing you there for a cup of tea. Thank you very much.
Thank you.